Hello, you horror fans. I'm David with Terrible Reviews, and if you like all things horror, make sure you hit that follow button. Today's review is going to be George A. Romero's Land of the Dead. Now, I haven't seen a good zombie movie in quite a bit of time, so hopefully this is a good zombie movie. Let's find out. Okay, so this was not what I expected going into this movie. Now, unfortunately, I'm not too familiar with George A. Romero's like politics or anything, but this movie was an anti-capitalist like class unification story, and I loved it. So let's get right into the review and find out what Land of the Dead was about. So starting off with terror, is this movie scary? Only if you're not really comfortable with gore. This movie is a gore fest. We'll get more into that in the gore category, but there isn't really anything scary in the story itself. Rather, the visuals are like going to be terrifying if you're not okay with the gore. So for this one, I will give it a 3 out of 5. It doesn't meet my like levels of scary just because like the story isn't technically scary itself. But yeah, that's my thought on the terror. So it might be a 5 for you if you're not a big fan of gore. Now on to the gore. This movie was just gore corn. I can't say the actual word, but it is filled to the brim with the gore. The only downsides, and I'm not taking any points off for this because it made up for it with the amount of practical gore in this movie. Oh my god, like it is almost every other minute there is like a good piece of practical effect gore in this movie. But there is a lot of use when they're using guns of CGI blood spatter. And then there is also one scene in particular with a head that's like barely hanging on. You'll know what I'm talking about if you've seen the movie. There's a head barely hanging on that like snaps back and like bites someone, and they use CGI for that head, and it was awful. Like it looked terrible. But as I said, this movie has so much practical gore in it and so much blood and guts and everything that I could ask for in gore that I have to give this a 5 out of 5. There is non-stop just something happening in this movie that it requires a practical effect, and they went overboard, and I loved every second of it. It looks great. It is very stomach churning if you are not a fan of gore, so just be aware of that when you go into this. It is a lot. Like, this is a zombie movie that will show you the zombies and what they are doing to the bodies, and they are not afraid to hide it behind like shadows or anything. They do have scenes like that, but they will show you. Like, they will show you. So yeah, gore, 5 out of 5 easily for me. This was amazing. Now on to the story, and this is where things get interesting. So starting the movie, I wasn't a big fan of how the story was going. It wasn't really moving, and like there really wasn't a story point that I could really follow in this one. It was just kind of your typical like someone does something bad and it kind of leads to some turmoil. But you will realize later on in the movie what everything is leading up for. So this movie asks the question, like, what if zombies were like more conscious and like were able to learn things? And the reason they do this is because those zombies are representative of the lower class, the poor of a country. And it kind of reflects on the human side of that poor aspect as well in the movie. But this is a class unity movie and an anti-capitalist movie, and I mean that like to the fullest extent. They went hard at showing this towards the end of the movie. But basically, I don't want to like spoil it too much, but basically the zombies represent the poor, and they are coming after the CEOs. As like I wish I hadn't done like the skit in the last video, because it would have fit this video way more perfectly. Because that's exactly what this is. It's the poor rising up against the 1%. And that's what this movie's about. It even, the ending is a, maybe they're not so different than us after all. Like, which I didn't really enjoy that. I do need to add in here that if you're not a fan of John Leguizamo, you may not like this movie as much. I love him. I love most of the movies in it. I'm a big fan of The Pest, so you can tell like, kind of what my tastes are. But I know that he does annoy some people, so if you're not a big fan of him, you may not like this movie as much as I did. So just fair warning there, he is himself in this movie. Or at least like the characters that he like mostly plays in movies where he's like kind of an asshole. So if you're not a big fan of his acting, you may not like this movie, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed most of the acting in this movie. I felt like the characters were pretty great. It's just the story wasn't like as strong as I would hope it would be. But overall, I really, really enjoyed the story in this just because it kind of aligns with like my political beliefs. So if you're in the same boat, you'll probably enjoy this movie more than others. But overall for the story, I will give it a 3 out of 5. Like I said, the actual story itself doesn't really do much. This movie is heavily carried by the gore, which I love, but the story is kind of like your run-of-the-mill kind of Mad Lib zombie movie story. So I can't give it too much there. And lastly, is this movie fun? If you are like me and really, really love gore and practical effects, you will love this movie. I will guarantee you will have a good time with this movie. If you do not like that stuff, you will probably have a terrible time with this movie. But for me personally, I will give this a 5 out of 5 for fun. There wasn't a second in this movie where I wasn't like looking forward to the next scene. So I really enjoyed this movie. Is it terrible or terrifying? I would have to say this is definitely terrifying. If you haven't seen this movie already and you like zombie movies, definitely go see Land of the Dead. I was not expecting this to be this good. So, have you seen Land of the Dead? If you have, let me know what you thought in the comments below. But, as always, I'll see you guys in the next review.